Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Matteo from Finer Wine Kits.
And I'm Matt Brzezinski from Label Peelers Beer and Wine Supply.
We have some fun stuff for you today. We're going to show you stage 2 of your wine kit process.
We'll be showing the transfer from the primary fermentation bucket to the secondary glass carboy, and we'll also be stabilizing and clarifying.
Let's get to work. All right everyone, we're ready to rack our wine from primary to secondary fermentation.
Absolutely, but first we want to check the specific gravity reading to make sure that we fermented all the way out before we go to this stage, because after this stage there's not going to be any more fermentation going on because we're going to kill off the yeast and stabilize our wine. So we have sterilized everything beforehand, and you can see our video on sterilization to show you the different ways of sterilizing your equipment. It's very important to keep your equipment clean and sterile.
And I'd like to make a point before we start. If everyone notices, this is an auto siphon that we're going to use to transfer this. This is not laying on the counter and it's in the bucket with the sterilizing agents, because your equipment should never touch anything it does not have to touch.
Absolutely.
So it's a really good habit just to keep any of your tools in a bucket when you're not using them.
All right, so I already popped the lid and just had it set on here because it is difficult to get these lids off, and we have this set up here. So I'm going to set the lid over here. We're done with that lid right now, but we're going to pull off the airlock out of the bucket and reuse that for stage 2. Now in the kits we use, the equipment kit comes with a drilled universal bung. I like a little toy called a carboy cap. It's a little easier to work with it to keep stuff standing up while we're doing our process and isn't going to fall over and leak all of our water out of there. So we're going to take the hydrometer. So this is a triple scale hydrometer. We're only going to use the specific gravity scale. And we're going to spin it. There's bubbles that are still in trapped CO2 in there that can throw off your specific gravity reading, so you spin it so the bubbles will come to the surface. What we're looking for is 0.996 or lower. And it looks like we're right on 0.996.
Yep, so that one is just slightly buried underneath the surface.
We're 2 ticks above the 1, which is the scale is backwards.
And what that basically means is that all of the sugar in the original juice was converted into alcohol.
Okay, so the next step, we're going to, since it's already finished out, we're going to add our sorbate and our sulfite. The sulfite keeps your wine fresh over time. It's an antioxidant. The sorbate kills your yeast off so that it can't eat any more sugar cells if it gets into a little warmer environment. If you ever don't use the sorbate, it could ferment just a tick more and give you an effervescence in the bottle. So we don't want that.
And I see you're mixing it with water.
Yes. It makes it much easier to dissolve this, and it's also good to put it in the carboy first so that you're siphoning your wine on it and it's protecting your wine from oxidation from the air that's in this carboy. Okay.
And that little bit amount of water is not going to influence, it's not going to change the taste of your wine at all.
That's 100% correct, because that there's already going to be a little bit of sediment loss, so we would have to top that up with water or a similar.
Clear that out.
Yep. Can you give me a push on the top of that? Give it a couple. Yeah, you know what? Let's just empty it this way.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So we want to put the tubing into the carboy. We're going to take it to the back of the carboy. And we're going to slowly go to the bottom. We're going to hold it still. You have an anti-yeast sediment tip on there, so it's no problem.
Now what I want to show too is I have a book here. Now since there's 2 of us, we don't need to use this, but one of the things that you can do when you're working alone is if you wanted to just raise up the edge of this and slide a book underneath it, like so, you lift it a little bit and just slide something right in there, just like that. It's just enough to give you a low point at the back of the bucket. So this way, if you're working by yourself, you don't have to worry about losing too much wine at the bottom of your bucket. But we can take this out for now.
Yeah, since there's 2 of us, we can just do this together.
Correct.
Now, what I was getting at is with the anti-yeast sediment tip that's on your auto siphon, it's not really critical that you stay off the bottom at this point. It still hasn't completely clarified. In fact, we're going to be adding our clarifying agents in here. It's actually more important that you elevate your bucket the night before, or at least 4 hours before you're going to do this siphon, so that anything you stir up has a chance to go back down in your lees. That's what we call a sediment in here. And so basically we're just waiting for this to get done.
And it does the work itself. Gravity is an amazing thing, and it will transfer. Now, as we go down, Matt, what do we're going to pull this up slightly, right?
We're going to pull this up slightly when we get. That's a good point. When we get into the shoulder of the carboy, we're going to pull the siphon up and stop it so that we can get our mixture in here and stir everything up. And we're going to be degassifying at this point.
Yes.
That's really important. We're not just stirring in the antioxidant, the stabilizer, and the clarifier. We're also driving off any entrapped CO2.
Correct.
We get entrapped CO2 in the spring and fall when we're fermenting at lower temperatures, but you really want to degassify all your wine. You don't want to have a fizz to it whenever you get to the bottling stage.
And also, another thing about CO2 is it's important to degas when you get to this stage, because CO2 can absorb back into your wine, and you don't really want that to happen. So the more gas you can get out of it at this stage is definitely preferable.
You definitely don't want entrapped CO2 because it's going to be halfway to champagne. You either want champagne or you don't want champagne.
We don't want champagne.
That smells good.
It smells great. Color's real nice.
Okay.
So everyone, I put a piece of tape on here because I want to show you this book technique in action. Because if you're working alone, once you get to the point where you're starting to get towards the bottom, once you tip this back, that means that back here you have a low point. The wand's not going to move. Your hands are free to work this as you need to, and you're going to get as much wine out of this as possible. Because remember, once you go to this secondary fermentation stage, the wine's going to continue to settle out, especially with any of the clarifying agents that we're going to add. So even if you do pull up a little bit of sediment from the bottom, that's going to settle out. And you want to get as much wine out of your batch as possible because waste is just not a good thing when it's not necessary.
And it's less water needed for topping up.
Correct. What are we doing there? Almost there.
All right, so we're getting up into the shoulder. So we don't want to get too high on this because sometimes when you start to stir, and if you did have entrapped CO2, then it would give you the volcano effect. We'll foam all the way up and come out of your carboy and get all over the place and make a mess, and then you got to sterilize everything and go back from there. So we're going to put the hose inside the sterile spot here so we know we're not going to get anything on any bacteria, and we are going to stabilize and degassify. So what we have here is a nice little toy called a mixture. It's product number 4669. Most of us like to use tools and power tools here, so you put it in here. It's been sterilized as well. If you move that bucket back just a little bit, there we go. All right, so we're going to mix those sterilizers. You don't want to mix it so hard that it comes out the top, but you want to be pretty aggressive with it so that you are driving off any of the entrapped CO2. You'll see it come into the surface like we have.
So we have these bubbles here.
These bubbles here. We are degassing. Now, if you're just using the backside of a paddle, you want to do it for about 2 minutes. If you're using a mixture, about 30 seconds is fine. Now, we're going to give it another stir when we add the clarifier in here. Now, with the clarifier, we're using chitosan and chysocell. They're charged ions that are going to cling to the negative or the oppositely charged suspended solids that are in there.
Now it's important to note that when we add these substances, they do not stay in the wine. The purpose of these is for them to bond with particles that are too light to settle out just by the force of gravity.
That's exactly correct.
So what they do is they will bond to those particles floating in the wine and add enough weight for them to settle out in the bottom. There we go.
All right, now we're going to give it one more stir.
And if you notice, those little tips at the end are made to fit.
See, I had to back off on that drill a little bit because it was getting too much of a vortex. If you come off the bottom, it'll back it down there as well. So I like to give it a good stir all the way up and down so you're degassing the whole thing and mixing your clarifiers in there. Okay, now we can finish siphoning. And if we need to, we'll top up.
We'll see. Can you give it a pump?
Yep.
Actually, I'm going to put this book underneath the edge of this. So we have that reservoir again with the tape. So all I got to do is pump once and twice, maybe 3 times.
Because we're at the bottom, you got to give it a couple aggressive pushes there.
Let's go all the way up. There we go.
You got it.
There we go.
See all that CO2 that was entrapped in there? We're driving it off so it's not going to go in your bottles.
And all that will bubble out. And if you notice, he's submerging the tube because you don't really want the wine splashing around.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. You want to have that tube so it's kind of curved in the curvature of your carboy.
Correct. Because oxygen is good when you drink it, not when you're aging it.
Oxygen is great on fermentation side of things, but it really messes with things on the there we go. That's about all we're going to get. So we are going to need to top up just a little bit.
What we can do is we can remove this tape, take this off. Okay, get this out.
All right.
There we go.
All right.
Now, one of the things also I want to add too is that when you're first transferring out of primary fermentation, this amount of headspace is not really problematic just yet. You're going to have a lot of gases that are still going to be coming out of here. And once you put the airlock on here, you're going to be able to see inside that airlock if there's pressure coming up. And as long as there's pressure in there, that means that you do have a bed of carbon dioxide to protect your wine. After we get through the first 2 weeks of secondary fermentation, that's when we want to start paying closer attention to getting our levels up closer, because as time goes on, it's going to gas out less and less and less.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, so now that we've got the bubbles are gone, we've topped up our carboy, and now what we wanted to show you was the reason why your auto siphon has a cap in the bottom.
The anti-yeast sediment tip is to keep the lees out of there. As you can see in the bottom of this bucket, all the sediments in there, and we don't want to carry that over into the secondary. So we want to leave that behind because it has the dead yeast cells, some particulate matter from the grapes, and we want to keep that behind. So the anti-yeast sediment tip keeps you about 3/4 of an inch off the bottom of your bucket so you don't carry that over.
Correct.